Braids Cabal Minion was recently unbanned and makes for a pretty powerful commander. There's a reason why it was banned, and now that it's unbanned, Braids is free. You guys can build Braids, and there are some fun ways to build Braids. The little archetypes I'm going to be talking about here are an artifact-based deck, because Braids is an artifact sack outlet, which is pretty cool, and you can do some artifact shenanigans. We're going to talk about creature sacrifice, of course. It's probably going to be the most common build. And then we're going to talk about a Stax build, because Braids is a pretty Staxy card, so you might as well fill the deck with a bunch of other Stax pieces to really slow the game down. Also some one-off cards, and one of the most powerful things you can do with Braids is turn 1 Braids. Ways to turbo out Braids are going to be extremely powerful in this deck, so I have my own little category for those as well. Before we jump into this though, please subscribe to the channel, helps out a lot. Comment down below if you plan on building Braids, and if there's any cards that I didn't mention that you are putting in your deck. Let's do this. We're going to start off with the artifact deck. There's a lot of different cards you can put into this deck. I'm going to start off by talking about the artifacts that you would want to sacrifice to Braids. Artifacts that either have an upside to sacrificing, or they're really easy to produce fodder, or they're just like cheap cards that do their thing when they enter, and then when they go away, it doesn't really matter. Blood Fountain is pretty nice because it also gives you a blood token, so it's 2 different artifacts you can sack for 1 mana. Chromatic Star, it'll draw you a card. Ichor Wellspring, ETB, and when it dies, you draw a card. Mephitic Drought, ETB, you draw a card. Then that's all it does, so it's really nice to just sacrifice. Mycosynth Wellspring gets you some lands. Nimblewright Schematic, which also makes artifact creature tokens, which is perfect. Prize Statue gets you some treasures. Servo Schematic, same thing as Nimblewright Schematic. Solemn Simulacrum, Terrarian, and Wizard's Rockets. There's a ton of just like dorky little artifacts that you can throw into this deck to sacrifice. These are the ones that I think they'll have the biggest upsides. If you do go this route, you're going to want to have some synergies for all of these artifacts being sacrificed. There's a lot of cards that give you additional benefits when you're sacrificing artifacts. You've got Disciple of the Vault, can drain out your opponents. Same thing with Marionette Apprentice, Marionette Master, and Psychomancer. Junk Diver is a really interesting card in this deck. I love the idea of filling a deck with like Junk Divers, Mirror Retrievers, Scrap Trawler, and Workshop Assistant type cards. Just being able to recur all the things that you're sacrificing to Braids seems really beneficial. Packdoll Terror seems fantastic here. Seer of Stolen Sight. Slagstone Refinery, which gives you additional artifacts to sacrifice. Same thing with Sly Requisitioner. And Tarian Soul Cleaver can just kind of make Braids really big, which doesn't matter that much, but it's kind of cool in here. And along with those, just a few cards I wanted to mention that are like artifact payoff cards. They're just good inside of the deck full of artifacts. Biotransfervescence is a really cool card. Chronomancer, another sack outlet. Liberator to cast all your stuff at instant speed. And Oval Chase Daredevil, which is insane in this build, because you can sacrifice Oval Chase Daredevil to Braids and then get it back to your hand by just playing an artifact, and you can do that over and over and over again, which is pretty awesome. I think this artifact build is a ton of fun. Like, this is probably the build that I would personally do if I was building Braids. Maybe I will do this, and maybe I will give the deck away. Who knows? You better be subscribed if you want a chance at that. But it seems like a very fun game plan. And just like looping stuff in and out of the graveyard is really cool, especially when it's artifacts in mono black. That's not typically what you're sacrificing in mono black. Typically it's creatures. Let's talk about that next. First off, let's talk about some creatures that are good to sacrifice. Not technically a creature, but there are a bunch of cards that make creatures, like Bitter Blossom, Black Market Connections, Dreadhorn Invasion, Endrixar, Lord Skitter, Ophiomancer, and Blightmound. But Blightmound's making stuff when you sacrifice non-token creatures. So some of those other non-token creatures that seem like they're worth sacrificing are Bloodghast, very recurable. Same thing with Cult Conscript, Haunt of the Dead Marshes, Persistent Skeleton, Reassembling Skeleton, and Skyclave Shade. Canoptic Scarab Swarm is a nice graveyard hate card that also generates a bunch of tokens you could sacrifice. Cards like Ravenous Chupacabra, where they have an ETB and then they're just kind of like a dorky creature that you can sacrifice to Braids, is pretty good here. If you're sacrificing all of these creatures, you're going to want to have cards that synergize with your stuff dying. You've got drain effects like Blood Artist, the Meathook Massacre, and Vein Ripper. Drivnod seems absolutely perfect for this deck, especially with the cards in this category. Grave Pact is backbreaking, especially when you have Braids going. Homicide Investigator, which poops out tokens you can sacrifice. Liliana Dreadhorde General. Macaeus the Unhallowed works awesomely when you're sacrificing non-token creatures. Pitiless Plunderer to generate treasures. And Sir Conrad for some more drain, plus when you have things leaving your graveyard like a Skyclave Shade, you get to drain your opponents again. So we talked about artifacts, we talked about creatures. Braids also lets you sacrifice lands, and I was gonna do a category about like a mono black lands deck, but there's just not enough support inside of Braids. Like, you can run Crucible of Worlds, but there's not enough of those types of effects and additional lands per turn and stuff like that in mono black. So I don't think Braids is quite ready for that yet. Hopefully someday you can build a mono black lands deck around Braids, because that would be really sweet. But you want to know what you can build Braids around? Stax. You can make a really mean deck with Braids. Let's talk about some of the good Stax pieces you could toss into this deck. Contamination. I love this card. Very powerful. Cursed Totem, just make it so your opponent's creatures can't do their thing. Null Rod. Braids makes it so your opponents might have to sacrifice their mana sources. Null Rod makes it so their artifacts won't be able to produce mana, so they'll be kind of like really slowed down. Smokestack, the card that the term Stax comes from. Sphere of Resistance, again, if your opponents are mana short, cards that make their spells cost more to cast seem great here. Same with Thorn of the Animist. You've also got Static Orb, Winter Orb, and Winter Moon to really put a stranglehold on your opponent's mana. Trinisphere to make your opponent's spells always cost 3 or more. And Torpor Orb. Decent. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, an early Braids is the strongest Braids. Like, if you're able to get Braids out like turn 1, turn 2, it's backbreaking. It's going to be really hard for your opponents to get back into the game. You'll probably just end up grinding that game out for a win. It's going to take a while, but it's going to be hard for you to lose. Some of the really good ways that you can get Braids out early include Blood Pet and Lotus Petal for 1 turn faster, Cabal Ritual, Culling the Weak, Dark Ritual, and Mana Vault. Plus you can sack Mana Vault to Braids, which is pretty nice. And lastly, let's talk about some of the one-off cards, just cards that do good things in this deck. Black Market can generate a ton of mana. You have the other Braids, Arisen Nightmare, which is on theme and still pretty good in this deck. I mentioned Crucible of Worlds earlier. I like that a lot here because you're sacrificing lands, you'll be able to get those lands back, pretty neat. Dauthi Voidwalker, so you can just exile everything your opponent sacrifice. The most important card in this whole deck being Dingus Egg. Make your opponents sack their lands and take damage. You could also use Dingus Staff. Giza Glorious Resurrector. Massacre Worm. Meathook Massacre 2. Moonstone Eulogist. Revel in Riches. And of course cards like Turgid. Turgid is disgusting here. That is everything I've got for Braids Cabal Minion. Let me know if you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Peace out, everybody.